much, Cathaoirleach, and thank you very much for coming in. I want to congratulate you on an exceptional piece of research and a very comprehensive report. I have 3 questions. I'm going to try and keep them as brief as possible. The first is with regard to language. You spoke about it in your opening statement, and I'd like you to elaborate on that, and with regard specifically to the use of the term birth mother. And that I suppose I've noted in your comments previously that you see this legislation as transformative, as being an opportunity of restorative justice. So I'd like you to elaborate on that. The second thing is you're very strong in your position on there being a need for a new agency. And I would like you to I think your views are compelling on it, and so perhaps you'd like the opportunity to elaborate on that. And lastly, this legislation is about a balancing of rights, and while first and foremost is the absolute and unequivocal right to birth information from an adoptee or the person seeking that birth information, there is also a balancing of rights with regard to privacy at the heart of it. So would you like to elaborate on your views on that as well, please? Thank you.
If the witnesses want to respond,
sure. Just with regard to terminology, it was very clear from the research that we undertook with regard to our primary research, was 468 respondents. Over 200 replied to our question on preferred terms, and the clear preference was for birth mother stroke father, followed by mother stroke father, followed by an amalgam of them, which will be, say, for example, birth biological father. The issue around terms is actually, as you say, a very sensitive issue. But speaking at from a adoptee advocate point of view, the reason that birth mother is used is because for every other term there is a opposite, I suppose, that impacts negatively on our families, our adoptive families, who are in legislation, our families recognised as our families. The difficulty is that with, I suppose, negotiating around, you have to think that balances adequately the needs of birth parents, the needs of these. We also touched on, I suppose, the stigma and the shame. The marginalisation came across very clearly with regard to the feelings of adoptees. So we have to understand how language feeds into that, how questioning the reality of somebody's family, the naturalness of somebody's family, can actually impact negatively on adoptees. Now, I doubt if any members of the committee have ever been told that their father is not a real mother and father, which is not a very pleasant position to be put in. And I don't think that we should be continuing this as regards legislation, as regards the term natural. There's nothing that is progressive about it. This is a term that has been used, correspondence going back to the 80s from the adoption board that used the term natural. So when we're looking at a transformative bill that we would hope would allow adoptees access to information, which is long needed, that we would actually look more constructively at the use of terms and the impact they have. We need to understand and see that adoptees and birth parents are both victims of this system. So we have to have terms that are respectful of both. As regards the agency, I think Roti probably could answer that more successfully than I could, but I feel that there's issues of trust, and we felt that this will become a barrier to participation with regard to adoptees interacting with the new agency. There's also this model where adoptees were spoken to over files, was quite alarming and concerning. And this seemed to be a model of interaction rather than an isolated incident. So we given all of the circumstances that it would be best to incorporate all of the different facets of this one issue into one agency, which would make far more sense than actually having it in a piecemeal basis as it is at the moment. Rosie would probably take the question by way of balancing of rights.
Rhodey, do you want to come in there very briefly? Because I'm conscious I do need to move on to some of the others.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me there. Go ahead. So there's a number of questions that Senator Chair, I just wanted to, is it the agency you'd like me to discuss now, or what particular issue would you like me to come?
The last question was with regard to the balancing of rights.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Senator, for that. And so the balancing rights is both really the elephant in the room when it comes to getting the legislation right on adoption and the information and tracing. And most members of the committee now at this stage, I think, with all the different representations made, will probably be aware of the seminal case in the Supreme Court, the IoT case, which was the case that identified the right to identity for adoptees and for people generally. So that's unqualified, an unenumerated personal right in the Constitution under Article 40.3.1. And so since that, then there's always really the issue of the birth mother's privacy, which is also a right under the same article in the Constitution, an unenumerated right under Article 40.3.1. And so the difficulty really has been for legislation to balance that right. Our contention would be, and the contention of all adoptees would be really that the birth mother's privacy has been given priority as a right over and above the constitutional right of identity. So the constitutional right of identity is not just a right that's recognised here in Ireland, but it's also one recognised in the European Convention on Human Rights, and there's much case law on the matter. So it's not just an Irish issue, it's recognised abroad. And, you know, if you look at it in stark terms, as legislators, really, it's kind of a question of removing the kind of the balance really in favour of adoptees here. And if you think about it in terms of adoptees and their families who don't have access to, in many cases, health information, and for adoptees themselves not even knowing what their identity is, where they come from, something that as legislators should probably be something you probably would think about and take a lot of serious consideration over. It's a practical issue really. When you consider the issue regarding who I am, where do I come from, I'm often by this. I did a lecture many years ago in CD for about 250 nurses, and we spoke about this idea of freedom of information, accessing information. There was a case taken by an adoptee's daughter about this man had been born in the Rotunda Hospital. He was in his 80s, he was in very poor health, and he wanted to know who his mother was. And so he looked for information from the Rotunda Hospital. And the court, it was taken, the Rotunda Hospital refused on the basis of the privacy of the birth mother. The birth mother had been long dead at that point in time. But the court still went on with the privacy. The poor man went to his grave not knowing who he was, what his identity, his birth mother. And so I remember all the students, over 250, kind of, audibly gasping at the concept of not knowing who you are. And so that's really what is at the heart of this, really. And I think it's the political will on behalf of legislators to look at rebalancing the rights and to give priority to the right to identity.
So that's just going to interrupt you there. Apologies. We're very under a lot of time pressure, and I need to move on to some of the other senators.